I'll just check when you start talking. Okay, so now we have Peter Hutterer and Benjamin Tissoires talking about Libratbag.
Okay. So we're going to talk about Libratbag. It's a project that we started something like 3 weeks ago.
Probably 6 weeks by now, I think.
6 now? Yeah. So it's a project to configure these mice that are configurable. And Peter is going to do the talk, and I'm going to do the demonstration.
So basic summary, Libratbag is it's a library with a generic API for various different hardware vendors to allow you to set the various button mappings, key mappings, and so on and so forth on the on devices like this. So we've got two here. We've got the XDC2015 Rocket. Logitech has a whole bunch of them, and so on and so forth. So there's heaps of devices out there. Main audience for that is gamers, obviously. The library itself is completely implemented in user space. It's MIT licensed, and the first question, because we get that a lot, or as much as you can get in 6 weeks anyway, is like, why Libratbag? It's pretty much the only explanation. It just came to our head, and then we just used it. So the fact that you need to think about it is already a good point, because that means you remembered. Where it all started. So let's just say you spent about $100 on a mouse, something like this. So does it have switchable DPI? See? That's the $98 that's missing then. So, okay, so I'm also talking in Australian dollars. So with the current exchange rate, that'd be like what, 20 US or something. So let's just say you spend $100 on a mouse. The next thing you need to do is now you need to install Windows to configure it, which is obviously not really a particularly long-term solution for a Linux desktop. The price range is actually $100. We just took that as a number. I think the XDC2015 that started it all was about $29 US. Yeah. They go up to 170, I think was the most expensive mouse I've ever seen. First, the implementation, our question was, are we going to put that in the kernel? Are we going to put it in user space? The kernel already has HID parsing, which is the protocol that all these devices speak, but exposing a fairly complex API through SysFS is not the best idea, especially when we're talking about like a million different features and feature combination depending on which device. To give you an idea, I'm not sure you can see it from somewhere, but this mouse actually has a feature where you can set the LEDs to breathing mode. So they just light up just as weird, like this breathing, pulsing style. Probably not something you want to have in SysFS somewhere. So we have the big advantage is also we don't actually need anything in the kernel because everything is handled by the hardware. We're not doing software profiles or anything here. We're just writing it to the memory in the hardware, and then the hardware does the rest, and we pretty much get out of the way again. We don't have any event handling at this point. We may get it in the future just to notify callers of like, hey, someone's just pressed the button to change the DPI. But we're not actually handling the events in the term of like in the style of libinput does, where you pass the events on. It's really just a notification. If anything, it'll be a notification system of like, hey, someone switched the profile, so you now need to display profile 1 in your configuration tool. It's up on GitHub. So the first question is like when you take a kernel guide and a user space guide to make a lib, first thing you get, like, well, you get something written in C. The other thing is, and that's a bit of a problem at the moment, your code base looks like half kernel driver and half user space library, depending on who wrote which bit. But it's, oh, well, okay. So it's fairly nicely abstracted though. So we actually have something that looks like a kernel driver and is effectively a hardware driver. So we've got, eventually we'll have a configuration UI that talks to the external API, and then in the bottom of the library we have the various driver backends. So at the moment we support the HIT++1, at least partial support. That's the G5, the G500S, and just this morning I merged a patch for the G9. We support partial support for the HIT++2, which is pretty much everything newer from Logitech. So the MX Master, for example, T650 is a touchpad. Not much to configure, but you still talk to it. The G303, which we only bought a couple of days ago. We got the XDC2015, which is the one that started it all, and we already have support for the Rocket Cone, which got merged 2 days ago. So we're building up a nice support for various hardware devices here. Implementation, the API is, well, mostly cut off, but also quite simple. You start a context, or you create a context. You say, okay, here's a UDEF device. Give me a Ratbag device for that. And the basic configuration is that every device has a number of profiles, at least one. Within a profile, you have the buttons that you can configure. Within a profile, you have a number of resolutions. So, for example, the G500S supports up to 5 resolutions within a profile. So, and then you can have a button to switch between those. And then if you change the game or something, you just switch to the next profile, and then you have different resolutions for whatever game you play then. We support various button mappings, so we can map a button to a key combination, and a button to a couple of special events, like you can map a button to double click, or for example to switch profiles and DPI and so on and so forth. Don't take this as a stable API yet. We're obviously version 0.0.1. After 6 weeks, we're not quite tempted to call it a stable API just yet. We got a couple of helper tools, fairly straightforward. List, Benjamin is going to demo it anyway. List information, things like what's the current DPI of my mouse, so DPI get, set, but you can also do, okay, so on profile 3, resolution 2, make that the DPI 200. Or you set a macro, press enter, wait 50 milliseconds, then release enter. And that will happen whenever you press that button, you actually get those key events in. Yeah, so we've got a demo prepared.
Thank you, Peter. Where are we? There. So yes, so the where are we? So the first command that you have is write command list, which hopefully shows all of the list of all of the supported devices. We basically try to contact every device. We open it, see if the device works. If it works, then we just return the value and we say, okay, you can use even 440 XDC, which is this one. Once you've got your device information, you can run info on it, and it lists every possible thing that you have. So here you have 5 profiles. Profile line is starting at 0. On the profile 4, you can see that we have a bunch of DPI resolution. They are kind of weird because you can set a per axis resolution. So you could say like 8,000 on X and 1,000 on Y. Don't know why, but they do. We've got a bunch of mapping for the buttons. We kind of trying to tell which button is which one. So the button 0 is obviously the left one, but like on this one, the button 1 is the right, and I think on the Rocat one, the 1 is the middle. So a little bit weird. You can also in the API, where are we? There. You can request for the active profile. It tells you this is the profile 0. If I move it in the mouse, you can see that it's profile 2. Yeah, works. You can set the profile, so that means that we can actually change things and write things back to the mouse, which works. Yeah. But the thing is that we believe that this is a nice CLI, but the idea behind that is that the various desktop environment will use it to show the mouse and to configure it. So we wrote tool for that, which is Libratbag GUI, and it shows it shows the an SVG of the mouse that we provide in Libratbag, and the various mapping, and we hope that the desktop environment will take this as a basis for their GUI and for their application. So we hooked up a little bit of events for this. We can see that if I'm running at 8,000, my mouse is going completely crazy. And it kind of works. One last thing I wanted to demo is you can put macros in it. It takes a little bit of time. If you look at the GUI, we can update the GUI. Which profile? Yeah, this one of this profile. Can't remember which one is it. This one. And if you hit the button, it says hello. Kind of. Close enough. Yeah. So that was the demo.
Yeah. So first of all, UI we just showed off, this is not going to be the final UI. It's just a test, so we haven't even merged it into master. We won't merge it into master either. We're going to be working with the Gnome, KDE, and all the other guys to actually get a proper desktop environment tool for configuring these. And yeah, so future is obviously desktop integration, big topic here, because the main thing is like we want one single application to support whatever devices out there, rather than the current state of the art is pretty much like every single hardware vendor has some project sitting on GitHub, usually not by the hardware vendor, but by some volunteer who's been hacking on that. And then for the Rocket one, you need to install a different tool than for the Logitech ones, and so on and so forth. So mainly what we're trying to do is just unify that. There is nothing really stopping us from using some of these tools as a backend in Libratbag to talk to the mass and just exposing the unified API. So that's why we need to talk into desktop integration. Obviously more hardware support. At the moment we've got a nice list of hardware. Once we get better, especially for the Logitech ones, once we get like better protocol support, that opens up a wide variety of devices. I'm not sure about the eTech City and Rocket ones. Yeah, whether that's a per device thing or once we support one, we support a number of them. We've already made the decision on like how are we going to talk that. We're just going to add a dbus proxy as a separate project. That's how the desktop environment tool will talk to it. Eventually we'll do Python bindings because that's probably what we're going to need as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions?
So a lot of this looks really useful, at least for what I'm doing with Wacom tablets, and very similar to what already exists in Gnome, where you can configure what buttons are going to be doing as far as macros, have multiple profiles set up so that you can change on the fly how things respond. And I think it's going to be wonderful to have something that works cross desktop environment. I'm wondering if you're using any of that Gnome code that already exists, or if there's anything, how much you've considered that like button box use case for the future.
The problem we have is that right now with Libratbag, we try to really constrain the project to only use devices that are programmable, that you can actually write the macro in the device. So here, when I press the button, it was the mouse which sent the hello.
If you unblock that mouse, plug it in here, you press the button, you'll get hello. So it's actually still on the hardware.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's what I do. So there is a slight difference between the code that we have in GNOME Control Center. Is that because in GNOME Control Center you are emulating the events, and that requires to be polling on the device to know when the key press has been in. And so it's kind of looks like, but it's not exactly the same.
Yeah.
So we inspired a little bit with that for the SVGs, like for instance. But we don't want to say, hey, we're going to support Wacoms, we're going to support everything. Does that solve the question? Or?
Okay. The only other question that I would have is, would there be interest in trying to add in some of that functionality of monitoring events and synthesizing things? It seems a little out of scope for what you're doing. But like I said, it would be really interesting to have something that works cross-desktop.
So so our general rule for Libratbag is if it doesn't happen on the device, we're not going to add it. So for event monitoring, like when you switch the profile, that actually changes on the device, and then the device itself changes behavior. And that's pretty much where the limit is. And at least we've talked to Bastian Nocera. He's not, at the moment, he's not particularly inclined to integrate it into the existing Gnome tools, so it'll be more likely a standalone application. Maybe with like a cross-link or something back forth. So I'm not sure how much integration we can get there anyway. But again, our big rule with Libratbag is if it doesn't happen on the device itself, we're not going to add it. So I don't think there's a lot of integration room for that once you take that into account. Any other questions?
So besides mice, like what other devices like have this kind of features where you can program stuff right onto the device?
We have a lot of requests for keyboards. A lot of gamer keyboards have fancy LEDs. They have also macros, macro keys, and everything. It's kind of, we are currently pulling back for that. We're just saying, no, we want to support only mice because mice, we know exactly what they are doing and everything. So, but we might eventually integrate those, not sure still. Also, the gamers have this weird button set with programmable everything on it. This is still unclear right now.
So the biggest difference is that mice have fairly defined problem scope, and you can use it on your normal desktop. With keyboards and other gaming devices, like all the extra keyboard things you can buy, the use in the normal desktop is not quite as well defined as a mouse. So it's opening again. If you say, oh, support these, but then you don't know what use case you support them for, so you're writing the right API and so on and so forth. So right now, especially while we're still struggling with, like, we need to add devices before we can even call that, yeah, this is a thing, it's safer to stick with where we know we can use that before we start enabling all the devices without knowing what we're going to do with them. Yeah. But the interesting thing is, like, the backend protocols are likely going to be the same. Like, I'm pretty sure Logitech uses the same protocol for keyboards.
Logitech,
so in theory, and one of the things we've been working is that the actual protocol implementation is separate or can be split out in the future from Libratbag. So there is the future path of, if we need to support the keyboards or something, we can split out the protocol bits into separate one that can then link into another thing. And yeah, a lot of the keyboards and mostly used for games. And the games probably want to talk directly to the keyboard anyway, rather than have like a desktop process handling that. But yeah, at the moment we're just chickening out and saying we deal with what we actually know and leave the rest until we have an understanding of it.
Because as soon as we support the keyboard, sometimes they will, like the Rocket ones. If you have a Rocket keyboard and a Rocket mouse, you can make them communicate to each other. I mean, it's not really directly, but you can do a key press on the keyboard, which activates a special mode on the mouse. So as soon as we get to this point, it's going to be a little bit hairy for us to put boundaries. So right now we just, okay, this is where we are. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Kind of just random curiosity, but if they make like left-handed versions of these, are they like the buttons enumerated backwards, or?
It's.
Oh.
Yeah, this one is completely symmetrical, and this is where it all started because, like, if you use this sun button, it's okay, but from time to time you hit this one, which are mapped by default at volume plus and volume minus, and so you've got a pop-up screen on your desktop, and was like, this is kind of annoying, and so yeah, so we had to look into that and say, okay, well, we can do a user space program to do it, and why not make a Lego? So yeah, basically, the craziest thing you can think of, they already thought of it.
In terms of actual physical hardware, yes, you can buy left-handed mice that are left-handed shaped.
Yeah. No, I was wondering, like, with the left-handed one, it would show up as buttons 1 through 5, versus with the right hand, it would be 5 to 1, or or if it's the same hardware inside. I don't know if you've looked to see how it enumerates.
It doesn't matter, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, we say this is the button left, this is the button right. And so, I mean, and then we have the SVG file. I mean, that's why we put the SVG, because this way the desktop environment don't have to try to have some heuristic to say, okay, this is button 0, so therefore it's the button left. So that's why we are trying to keep it all together. So it should not matter.
There's an interesting side effect for left-handed mice in general, is that left-handed people are so used to not having left-handed mice that they're used to using right-handed mice. So it's actually, in some ways, it's an open question of, when you remap buttons for a left-handed person, what buttons do you remap and how do you remap them? So we ran into that with libinput, for example. Libinput has a setting where you can say, I want this device to be left-handed. So for mice, that's straightforward, but on a touchpad, do you map the bottom, the emulated buttons at the bottom, do you remap them to be left-handed, or do you keep them right-handed? For tablets, it's the same when you spin the tablet around 180 degrees, so the buttons are now on your right because you're using the left for the pen. Do you flip the buttons upside down so that the bottom button is now the top button, or not? So like all these are open questions, which doesn't help that I'm not left-handed and none of the other. I think Hans, you're left-handed, isn't it? Oh no. Yeah, so we don't actually have any left-handed people to give us input at this point.
Leo is.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
And I do actually happen to have a left-handed mouse.
Okay, so you have a left-handed physical. Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of open questions that we're not quite sure because it's not quite as well defined either, because the problem scope is just a bit blurry from all the right-handed people that keep messing up things. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? All right, then thank you.